All right. So this is awesome. A lot of people turn out, big turnout. It's great. Who's been to Alaska before? Bunch of people? Have any of you seen gelisols, seen soils in Alaska? No one? Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about soils, and I will try not to get too in-depth in terms of soil processes, recognizing that we have probably a little bit of a mixed crowd here. So I'm going to present some information that we learned on a tour that we took last summer called the Arctic Soils Tour, and this was a group of students and a few faculty members from across the country, and we traveled across Alaska, and we were trying to get a picture of what was going on with the permafrost. Okay, so I'm going to present some soil stuff. I'm going to talk a little bit about permafrost and carbon, and then I'm going to tell you a little bit about what other stuff we did on the tour. And I took a lot of pictures on this trip. I took 1,548 pictures, and it was hard selecting them. So I do have a lot of pictures in this presentation. So, but mostly just a show and tell sort of thing. Okay, if you have questions as we go, just stop me and we can talk about stuff, okay? All right, let's get going. So, first off, some questions for you. And I got prizes too. Okay, what's permafrost? Who knows what permafrost is? Yeah, in the back.
Permanently frozen soil.
Okay, permanently frozen soil. So, and, okay, I'll give you a prize for that. Do you want an I Love Soil sticker?
Yes.
Or would you like a soil color book? Okay, you're going to need to elaborate a little bit more then. Permanently frozen soil. So what sort of duration do you think it has to be frozen for?
At least 2 years.
At least 2 years. Good. Who said that? All right, that's good. So at least 2 years. So we need to have some perennial nature to the ice, okay? And when we talk about gelisols, which are our soil odor that defines these frozen soils, that permafrost would occur within the upper 2 meters, or more commonly within the upper meter. It can occur deeper if we have gelic cryoturbation with it as well too. Okay, so this is permanently frozen areas. And then above that, we have an area that thaws every year. Have any of you heard of this layer?
Yep.
Yes,
Layer.
the active layer. Okay, and this active layer is really important. This is the layer that's changing, and as areas are getting warmer, this active layer is growing. Okay, so in this soil profile right here, the permafrost starts at about right here, we think, and that active layer would be 60 up. Okay, and this is actually we're seeing a bunch of mass wasting here. This is right on the edge of a cliff, and this is all undercut by a stream. Okay, so active layer and permafrost layers. So the active layer is the seasonal thaw layer. Underneath that is that permafrost layer that's frozen for at least 2 years, continuously. Okay, so that's what is permafrost. All right, now the bigger question is, why do I care about permafrost, or maybe why do you care about permafrost? Does anybody care about permafrost, or are you just here for the free pizza and freeze pops? Yeah, in the back. Why do you care about permafrost?
Which one?
You had your hand up first. Lee did.
I care about permafrost because as the soil thaws, permafrost keeps it as a carbon sink. So as it thaws, more carbon is going to be released, which will eventually progress climate change even more so.
Okay. Okay, so there's carbon being released from the permafrost. Okay, and that could increase what's going on or have some effect on what's going on in the atmosphere in terms of CO2 levels and other greenhouse gases, right? So why are we particularly concerned with permafrost carbon? You can have a sticker for that, Lee. Would you like one? Okay. I don't want to see him in the trash can. Okay, so why are we particularly concerned with permafrost carbon?
It's one of the largest storage.
It's a huge sink, okay? It's a huge sink, and one that we don't know as much as maybe we should know about, okay? All right, so that's a good answer, and I got one sticker left, and you can have that. Do you want to pat?
I got 5.
Oh, you got 5, yeah? Oh, that's right, you're a 363 star. All right, so why do I care about permafrost? Well, because I care about the planet, okay? And I care about what's going on with the planet, okay? And if we look at the planet and we think about the global carbon stocks, or how much carbon is on this planet, where's the vast majority of the carbon? Yes? Up? Okay, so that's not actually correct. The vast majority of the carbon is in carbonate rocks. Okay, so these big pools of stuff that isn't the stuff that's actively changing. Okay, so for example, carbonate rocks and oceans. Okay, what's the remaining portions of carbon pools? Well, that's the actively changing pools. The stuff in the plants, in the soils, and in the atmosphere. So that stuff is more dynamic. Okay, and then permafrost carbon is a huge chunk of that. Okay, all right. So then if we split that active pool up into what's in the soils and the plants, depending on what system we're in, we can have up to 70% of that carbon in soil, or as low as maybe 50%. Okay, it depends if we're in more of a boreal system or if we're more towards a tropical system. Okay, but we have a lot of carbon in our soils. Okay, and then if we look at how that carbon's distributed across our different ecosystems, and you can see those are listed there. We have a bunch of it in our forests, okay, in boreal, tropical, temperate. We have a chunk of it in our grasslands. Agricultural and deserts occupy this little sliver. And then we have wetlands and tundra, which are definitely going to have some permafrost in. And then we have a big chunk of unknown carbon, okay, where we know it's there in the terrestrial, but we can't really pin it on where exactly it is and what terrestrial system it is. Okay, so it's described as this missing carbon sink. Okay, and we do think that a lot of it might exist in deeper soil layers than we've been quantifying. Okay, and some of this deep carbon is definitely present in this permafrost. Okay, so of these little slivers of our pie, the systems that the permafrost would extend to are all of these. We can get permafrost in boreal forest, we can have it in wetlands, tundra for sure, and we for sure have a bunch of this unknown or missing carbon sink that's probably present in our permafrost region. Okay, so a big chunk of our terrestrial carbon is found in permafrost. Okay, and then another way to look at that, so this is a map from a publication, recent publication by Plaza in 2018, and this shows soil organic carbon contents across the globe. And the darker the color, the more carbon. Okay, and you can see once we get up to our areas, our Arctic areas especially, that's a darker color. And in terms of putting that in terms of magnitude, that's kilograms per square meter, and our max about 90 kilograms. That's if you take me, I'm about 200 pounds, and bury me in the soil, that's about 90 kilograms per square meter. Versus on some of our deserts, well then if you took my finger and buried in the soil. Okay, so we're talking many, many magnitudes greater carbon stocks in these frozen areas. What's this area right here? Those are our prairie soils. Okay, so our prairie soils maybe would have maybe my arm or my leg's worth of carbon in that soil. Okay? All right, so now how much of that now do we know about permafrost and how much carbon is in the permafrost region? Okay, so there's a publication by Ted Scher, and we actually went and visited some of Ted Scher's neon plots up in Alaska when we were up there, and I'll talk more about that later. So we think that, and these are some of his estimates, that we think about 34% of the total terrestrial carbon is within these permafrost regions. So that extends the boreal forests, the wetlands that are up north, and the tundra regions. Okay, so a big chunk, almost greater than a third of our terrestrial carbon is in permafrost regions. And it's those areas highlighted in purple on this map. Okay, Alaska is where we did our trip, and if we just look at the carbon found in Alaska, that represents 3% of the global land carbon. Okay, and this is a map by Wang, and it shows the carbon stocks from the south end moving to the north end, going all the way up to about 300 kilograms per square meter. Okay, so about 34% of the total globe of carbon is in permafrost regions. All right, so now why that's important is because we're seeing temperatures change across our globe, right? Okay, and not only are they changing, but they're changing more rapidly in the Arctic. Okay, so in the Arctic we've been observing, and this is from the IPCC report in 2013, we've been seeing a 0.6 degrees Celsius increase every decade over the last 30 years, and this is about twice the rate of warming that we're seeing in other parts of the globe. Okay, so we have this big stock, and we have accelerated warming up in the Arctic region. Okay, so now we have a scenario where we could definitely be melting of permafrost and losing that large carbon stock. Okay, and this is where some of the uncertainty comes in, is how much of this carbon might be lost. Okay, I'll just give you a couple estimates on that. So another paper, the same paper by Ted Scher. And what they did is they did some modeling based on some climate change scenarios and existing carbon stocks in the permafrost region. And they found a couple interesting things. So one, when they did their model projections out over to 2100, they found that of the existing permafrost carbon, so at 34% of the global carbon, they estimated that they might lose about 8% of that by 2100. But more importantly, what they found was that this isn't going to end there, that we might see the effects over the next couple hundred years after that. And they said they predicted extended losses of up to maybe 60% of our permafrost carbon after 2100 in years 2200 and 2300. And that's a long time to project with a model, so there's lots of uncertainty as we get out there. But the point they made is that we don't think that these effects that we see in this permafrost melting are going to stop anytime soon. They might continue for quite some time. Okay? And then in Alaska, some of the model projections, this is a paper by Wang in 2016, and if anybody wants any of these papers, I have them up here, and I'm happy to share PDFs as well too. In Alaska, Wang estimates that they might lose about 62% of the permafrost carbon by 2100, so a big chunk of it. And this is a picture of some thermal karst landscape. So thermal karst melting of the permafrost, and what you see is that melting of the permafrost, and we're getting little lake depressions in there that are accumulating with water. Okay, so we're seeing and they didn't provide, so why we're potentially losing more in Alaska versus some of these other areas is probably something to do with the modeling. Okay, we have lots of uncertainty in terms of what's going to happen. Okay, and this is the last figure I'll show, and this is another figure from Ted's paper, and it does a nice job in talking about or explaining some of the uncertainty. Okay, so. And it really depends on whether or not you're going to be moving towards an aerobic or an anaerobic environment as the permafrost melts. Okay, so we can have a soil, as the permafrost melts, the soil can move towards more of an aerobic environment, in that you could have lake drainage and soil drying, and in doing so, you're going to be releasing most of your carbon in CO2. That's an aerobic decomposition. Okay. Oftentimes, we're also, like that last picture I just showed you with the thermal karst, where you're getting pooling of water in there. Well, as that permafrost melts, that's moving towards more of an anaerobic environment. And then the release of carbon is not only in CO2, but it also might be in what? What's CH4? Methane. And what's the significance of methane being released?
It's worse than carbon.
It's worse than carbon. What do you mean by worse? Yeah, so we think of it as so the CO2 equivalent of methane is about 25 times stronger than CO2 over the next 100 years. Okay, so it's a stronger greenhouse gas. And that's where a lot of the uncertainty really lies, is how much of the permafrost might be released as methane versus CO2. Okay, all right. And then we also have this feedback in that, we might, as these areas, as this permafrost melts, well, we might also be able to support more plants, and then those plants might be taking up more CO2. Okay, so there's that little feedback in there as well, too, that we need to consider. All right. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at some soils and talk a little bit about what we saw. Okay. Any questions so far? Yes?
How did all this carbon get there? And how is it still there? Would it be because
Okay.
it's not as highly disturbed?
Yeah, why do we have all this carbon up in the permafrost? This is a great question.
Didn't used to be frozen.
What's that?
It didn't used to be frozen.
Okay, so what's the freezing effect do though?
Keeps it there.
It keeps it there, right? We had
Decomposed by
yeah, we have very, very slow decomposition up there in these frozen areas. Okay, how the permafrost forms itself, I have a diagram at the back end of the presentation that I can talk about if you like. I didn't want to go into a lot of details in that, but essentially we have a very cold region where we don't have a lot of decomposition going on. Okay, here's another question.
You said most of the carbon is in like carbonate, like limestone and all that stuff. Is there any way that can be released, or is it once it's in, once it's in, it's in?
I don't know.
That was like the biggest.
Oh, okay, yeah. Sure. So that's stuff that's buried way deep down. So typically that's not going to be exposed. Okay. Okay, so the little tour we're going to take now is across Alaska, and it's transition latitude-wise. And we started down south in Anchorage, Palmer area, and we made it all the way up to Dead Horse, Prudhoe Bay. And as we went across up Alaska, we transitioned into different regions. Okay, so down here on the way southern end of Alaska, this red area highlights areas where we don't have permafrost. Okay, and when we move a little bit north, this area right here, sporadic isolated permafrost, this occupies about 18% of Alaska's land area, and here we'll have little pockets of permafrost. Okay, discontinuous permafrost, this is going to be areas that we have maybe about 50% of the land area has permafrost underneath it. Okay, and that occupies about 30% of Alaska. And then once we get north of the Brooks Range, and we're going to be about above 65 or so latitude north, then we're going to be areas of continuous permafrost. And those are anywhere between 50 and 90% of the area underneath that area has permafrost. Okay? And really what separates it is the Alaskan range. So this is the Brooks Range up here, and that's the Alaskan range right there, and that kind of separates those little chunks. Okay? So we're going to take a little tour and take a look at some soils. All right, so before I do that is, you have this challenge about how do you do a soil pit in a frozen soil? What's that? How do we do that?
jackhammer.
Jackhammer, all right. Yes, we get to use jackhammers. Okay, so that's one way we do it. There's actually a couple different methods we do it. So jackhammering was really fun. So essentially you're removing the hat. So most of the soils that have permafrost have these nice organic mats, call them the organic hats. We pull them off, and then we jackhammer, and we take a shovel and we excavate, and then we get a nice face. So that's one way we did it. Another way we did it is sometimes we have these elevated profiles that we call them, well, I call them pimples, but they're pingos and pimples, and I'll talk more about how those form. But sometimes the ice pushes the soil up, and we have an exposed face, and on those we can core right into it with like a little drill like I'm doing here. Okay? And then the last way that we sampled is we had this big ice auger, essentially, with a nice drill bit on there that allowed us to take these big intact cores all the way down. And then we can slice those cores up and we can measure stuff in those different cores. Okay, so that's myself and Holly, professor from River Falls, drilling one. Okay, and that's me really happy, my first drill. So, yeah. Okay. All right, so first part of our tour, Palmer to Fairbanks. Okay, so this is in that region of no permafrost to discontinuous and sporadic permafrost. Okay, and we'll take a look at some of the soils there. All right, so this is the first soil pit we dug in this region, and this is this a gelosol? What's that? It's an entisol. Okay, it is not a gelosol. So that means we did not have permafrost in the upper 100 centimeters or upper 200 centimeters with cryoturbation. We didn't have either of that. We're at 61.5 north. Okay, this is at an egg station near Palmer. It's an entisol, so it's a newly forming soil, a baby soil. Okay, it has horizons of AP, A/C, and a CG. So the CG is down here. This is the A/C, so distinct portions of the C mixed in with the A. And then up there we have an AP. Okay? So this is an entisol, and what do those G's tell us? This is a rather wet entisol. Okay? This is formed in loess. Okay? So, and I have some of this material that I'll pass around here. So this has a silt content almost close to 100%. Okay, so it's a really cool material. You should feel it if you haven't had a chance to feel something like that. Okay, and you'll see this. So one of the big loess engines on the planet are glaciers. As they recede, they leave this exposed landscape, and the winds pick that stuff and blow it all across there. Okay, so we have really silty textures of many of the Alaskan soils up there. Okay, but this is not a gelisol, but we're in an area where we don't have all gelisols. Okay. All right. Next one that was pretty close to this, a pretty similar soil. This one's not an entisol. This one is a what? Inceptisol. So it's a teenage soil starting to develop some properties. And one thing in particular about this one is it has some nice lamellae in here. So these are little bands of clay accumulation in, again, we're talking about loess. And this one has thixotrophic properties. So this is actually the soil there. So you take some of that. What that means is it doesn't retain its own structure. So when you wet it up and you shake it a little bit, it just loses all its structure because it doesn't have enough clay to retain. It's just a whole bunch of silt.
So how's their, oh, BTs is the lamella.
Yeah, yep. And I'll try not to get too much into all the labeling and all that stuff unless somebody has a question. This one has an organic horizon. Okay, so we're in a little colder area, so we're able to build up some organic. We're not in a farm field anymore. And we have some alluviation going on here. Okay? Again, no permafrost here. So this is kind of give you a background on what the soils look like when they're not frozen. All right. And then this one is adjacent to that one, and now we're in a little wet area. And we dug one here because we were trying to find the permafrost. Okay, so in this area of sporadic permafrost, it tends to occur in some of our lower landscape areas. Okay, but we were unsuccessful in finding it. We did not find permafrost within the upper 100 centimeters here. This is another inceptisol, and it's a wet inceptisol occurring in, a cold inceptisol occurring in cryotic soil temperature regime. And yeah, so no gelisols yet. And there's the silt showing that thixotropy, so it doesn't retain any structure. That's a wet puddled mess. All right. Our first gelisol. So we're at almost 65 degrees north here. We have found permafrost at about 50 centimeters here. Okay, so this is a typic historthel. Okay, so the different types of gelisols. What defines differences in gelisols? This one's a historthel. So this one, I know there's lots of people taking three. Emma. Organic matter. Okay, so we have organic matter up here, high organic matter. And then what's the other thing that defines differences in gelisols? Cryoturbation. Good. Remembered something. And that was okay, and less and more. Okay, so we're going to see some cryoturbation. What's cryoturbation? Turbing, mixing stuff up. Ice. So ice mixing. Okay, so up on top here, what do you think we call these? Histels. Okay, they have lots of organic matter. They have histic, and we call these orthels. Okay, and we call these Turb Ls. Okay, and I don't want to get too much into taxonomy, but this will allow you to think about the different types of gelisols that we might see, and we saw all of these different suborders. Okay, so this one happens to be our common one. Okay, it doesn't have a lot of cryoturbation in it, and it does have a bit of organic hat here, but it's not 40 centimeters. So these ones right here, they have greater than or equal to 40 centimeters of organic matter. So they'll have our big organic ones. Okay, so this one has a histic epipedon, so it's a hist-orthel. It wants to be up here, but it's just not big enough yet. Okay, so this is forming in organic materials here over glacial fluvial stuff. Okay, yes, Shelley.
Where's the W horizon start?
So the W on this one starts about right here.
How could like a W horizon, because that's water, right? So why would that be glade?
Why would that be glade?
Yeah.
So we have water in there. So a W horizon we use when we have greater than 50% of ice lenses. I'm going to show you the next picture. Okay, and these ice lenses here, when we looked at it, we guesstimated that we had greater than 50% volume ice lenses. Okay, and those ice lenses are a little bit deceiving. By weight, this water can be as much as 150% of the soil, and by volume, it can be almost 100% of the volume as well too. Even a picture like this. So these ice lenses that we see, there's many more smaller ones in there.
What are the ice lenses?
These little things right here. Can you see those lines? I'm not sure how it shows up back there. I think I have another one, yeah.
Oh,
Can you see that?
that's much better.
It's much better, right? Okay, so this is from that WF horizon. So that's a frozen layer, that little F, and then this is a layer that occupies greater than 50% water. Okay? And that structure is called, does anyone know what that structure is called? Lenticular is the structure, and it's the structure of the ice and the soil. Okay? And here's a really nice picture of, I was playing with that for about 5 minutes, and you can see it started to fall apart. Okay? All right. Okay, so that was the pits that we did in that area, and now we're going to move up to the discontinuous zone. So this is from Fairbanks to Arctic Circle, and here we're going to have probably permafrost covering between 50 to right around 50% of the land area. And again, this is between the Alaskan range and the Brooks range. Okay? All right, so we have another gelosol here. This one is a fiber stel. Okay, so we're up here in the histels, and that fiber means that we have very slow decomposition here. So we have lots of OIs representing this organic material. So slow decomposition, lots of fibers in there. Okay, this was at 65.5, and the permafrost is at 50 centimeters. Okay, so the permafrost here was pretty high up in the profile. Why is it high up in the profile? It has to do with the organic hat on the soil. What would that do? Why would that? How is that organic layer going to help that soil stay frozen longer?
Does it insulate it?
It does. Insulate it when? So it insulates it. Well, when would you be losing permafrost? During the summertime. Okay, so it prevents. I'm sorry, that was probably obvious, but I just wanted to make sure it's clear. Okay, so it prevents that thawing during the summer. So it acts as an insulation layer. Okay, so that was one of the important things. So we not only see, as we move up in latitude, we're going to see the permafrost get higher up and that active layer get thinner, but when we get more and more organic materials on top of the profile, we're also going to see that permafrost up and that active layer be thinner. Okay? And that was one of the things that we were kind of trying to focus in on as we went landscape to landscape. What are the driving factors for the permafrost? Okay? What else do you think might be really important? Sure, aspect would be really important. I mean, if you're on if you're getting more sun exposure, you're gonna have potential for melting. What do you think about, so snow is really important. How do you think snow plays into this? And snow thickness in particular?
Snow is also insulation, so it keeps the cold in.
What's that?
Snow also can act as like insulation, so it helps with the cold in.
When does snow occur?
The winter.
In the winter, okay. And in the winters when we're getting our freezing going on, right? Okay, so if I have a big layer of snow, anyone from the UP? Anyone been to the UP? Okay, all right. So up in the UP, we get tons of snow, and that snow comes early, and it often insulates the soil, and many of those soils don't freeze. Okay, same thing could be said in areas in Alaska where we get big layers of snow on top of that. Okay, it's going to inhibit the freezing of the permafrost. Okay, so areas that we get lots of snow are also problematic for permafrost melting. Okay, I'll point out a couple other things when we get to them. All right, so this one, permafrost at 50. And this is where we expected it in terms of this latitude. So this whole time, every time we did a pit, these were also pits that have been visited over the last 20 years. And we got to look in the same area and say, okay, the permafrost was here. It was at 50 centimeters last year, or it was at 70 centimeters last year. And we got to do some comparisons, and I'll point them out when they're important. This one was at where we expected it, about 50, because of that organic hat. Okay, and there's a close-up of the starting of that permafrost. And the permafrost was pretty easy to find. I mean, essentially, it was going to be that area where it was so frozen that we were having to spend a lot of time with the jackhammer, and we certainly weren't able to get to it with our shovels. Okay, there's always a layer above that was also had some ice in it, but that usually broke off pretty easily. Okay, and this was actually the first permafrost I touched, so this was a real special moment. I had one man tear come down. It was quite touching. I'm getting goosebumps now looking at it. I seriously did have a tear. All right, and this is the hat. Okay, so this was my last soil order I had to see in person too, so I was really excited. So this was the organic hat on this site. All right, so next one. Okay, so this is a 65.5 permafrost at 70 centimeters, and if you'll notice now, we're not up here. Okay, so we don't have as much of that organic hat, and the permafrost is deeper. Okay, it doesn't extend further to the surface. Okay, and we think that's primarily because we are actually, I think we're a little bit farther north on this one than that last one, or we're right next to it, but it's attributed, we think, to that organic hat. Okay, and this one is that organic material on top of lurs, and we're in a hummock pit. Okay, so a hummocky landscape is kind of a pit and mound landscape. Okay, and this can be created by tree falls or sedge type vegetation. And oftentimes when we had that, we dug pits in the mound and in the adjacent pit. Okay, and you'll see the next slide I'm going to show you, next picture is going to be on the mound. Okay, and in this pit we have less of the organic material, and also we have a big accumulation of snow in this pit. Okay, so that snow is going to pile up there, and that's going to have that effect of increasing that active layer thickness and that permafrost is going to be found deeper. And this one's particularly wet as well too. So we have an aquarthel. So we have gray redox within the upper 50 centimeters, and that's this stuff up here, this gray looking stuff. And we also found concentrations in there, that's those red things in there. Okay, so that's a wet one, a soggy one. All right, so this is right next to it, okay, and this is on the mound. And this one was one of our biggest organic hats. We have greater than 40 centimeters of organic material, so we should be up here in the histels. Okay, and this is very not decomposed at all. And you can see one of the plants that are really important for that is we have a large concentration of sphagnum in here. Okay, and horizons we have an OI, OE, A, BG, and CGF. Okay, frozen layer, and that permafrost. Now I think that was at 70 before. Just 5 feet away, that permafrost was 10 centimeters higher. Okay, and this is where we expected it in this area at about 60. Okay? All right. All across this landscape, there was reindeer lichen. Okay, has anyone seen this before? I was told that this is one of the favorite meals for moose and caribou, and then we got sphagnum all over there. But that was very important in terms of protecting or allowing that permafrost to freeze deeper. And then one of the other clues that we looked for when we drove around was this type of landscape. Okay, so permafrost was identified almost always when we saw this type of landscape. This sporadic tree growth, trees falling over. Okay, oftentimes the roots are hindered by the permafrost; they can't grow through there, so they have relatively shallow root systems and they tip over. Okay. Oh, and one thing I'll mention, also adjacent to this, we had large burn areas. Okay, and I don't have a picture of that pit, but we poked some holes. And what do you think the effect of fire does to permafrost? So, yeah, go ahead.
I would expect that the heat wouldn't penetrate as thick as you would think.
The heat doesn't penetrate, okay, so, but it changes something. It changes the characteristics of the surface. How so? Yeah.
So it removes the organic layer.
Removes the organic layer, that's going to be a big problem, right, for permafrost? Okay, and then also it turns that surface black, right? Okay, and then we're going to get a lot more heat in there. So the areas that were burned when we were poking holes in, we saw that the permafrost was twice as deep. And sometimes we'd have areas surrounding gelosols. We wouldn't even have gelosols that would have permafrost in the upper 200. Okay, so the fires were having a big dramatic effect on the permafrost layer. Okay, so that was the area that we looked at in that discontinuous zone. There's more pits we did. I'm just giving you a feeling for some of these. And then the last one is the continuous permafrost zone from the Arctic Circle up to Prudhoe Bay. Okay, and here we're going to see more often, we're going to see a lot more of the permafrost higher. The typical depth for permafrost in this zone was about 40 centimeters or so. But this is where we saw a lot of our change. A lot of the pits that we dug, we saw permafrost much deeper than we expected. Okay, so of the spots that we visited, this would be the area that we saw the most change. Okay, and there was some discussions on why that was, but most of the time it came to different local differences that were happening. Okay, so this is a fibrous cell. So again, we're up here, and we have lots of fibers in there, so very low decomposition going on here. We're on a high center polygon, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. And the profiles, we have OI1, OE, OI2, we have an OIF, and we have a slash horizon with a WF down here. Okay, this is a bulk site right off the Hall Road, and we're at 67, and permafrost is at 40. Okay, and this is the first, we got nice ice in the organic materials here. And this is another pit right next to it. What are we missing from that big chunk there? What do you think that was? What's that? Water. It was water in the form of ice. Okay, this was our first one where we started to see the big ice wedges. Okay, and I'm going to talk about what those ice wedges next. Okay, so this is a real similar profile, only that we went through an ice wedge right here. Okay, and when we started to see those ice wedges, again, another excitement time, we started to see our polygon type landscape. Okay, so these polygons, and this was the video I showed in the beginning. If you got here early, you saw that, and I'll show it again when we get to it in a little bit. These polygons on the landscape are one of the defining features of these permafrost affected areas. Okay, so we should talk a little bit about how they form. Okay, and I learned a lot about these polygons, and it was one of the cool things on the trip. Okay, so, and this one doesn't do it justice, and you'll see some of them when we get near Prudhoe Bay. They're really nice. Okay, so that's just me laying in one, giving you scale. This is the area next to the polygon, and this happens to be a high center polygon, and this is a lower area next to the polygon, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. And then here's a better picture of the landscape and a defined polygon here. Okay, and I think I got one more picture, and then we'll talk about polygons. This is looking north to the Brooks Range, and you can see the polygons right here. Okay, so they're not that well expressed. When we get further and further north, you're going to see them more better expressed. Okay, but how they form? Who knows how they form? Has anybody seen these? Those have been to Alaska. Have you seen them before? Does she know? Let's hear it. How do the polygons form? All right. Okay, so in the winter, we'll have a little crack. Okay, and this is year one. Okay, and maybe this crack is like a millimeter thick. Okay, so we have this little crack that occurs from the freezing in the soil. It starts off as a little bit of millimeter, and they're going to grow about a millimeter per year. Okay, in the second year, so in the spring, as this soil thaws, we're going to get water moving into here, into that crack, and water and other stuff too. Okay, And as that water moves in, and then subsequent year in winter, we freeze, okay, well, you're going to have more and more volume. And as that water freezes, it expands, right? Okay, so then over time, we can get these ice wedges. Okay, and they grow, this is obviously just a guesstimate or a rough estimate, about 1 millimeter per year. So in about 1,000 years, we might have a wedge about 1 meter thick. Okay, now these wedges set up this polygon type landscape. Okay, so where did I put that eraser? And there's two different types of polygons, and I thought this was a really cool thing that I learned from Sasha, was one of the leaders of the trip up there. Okay, so we can have, I'll start with what are called low center polygons. Okay, and these, when we see them, so that means that the center right here is lower than the surrounding area. Okay, these are indications of growing ice. Okay, and what's going on here is that the ice wedge is right here. Okay, and as that ice wedge is growing and getting bigger and bigger each year, it's expanding. Okay, and then it's thawing in the spring, and as it thaws and it's open in the spring, material's moving in, and this could be water and also gravel or soil or whatever it is from those areas right next to it. And then in the winter, as this freezes, it expands, it's churned, okay? And we call this that cryoturbation, okay? And it's pushed upwards, okay? Creating these little mounds right next to this expanding polygon or expanding ice wedge, okay? So one of the characteristics that we always look for when we came to these polygons is whether or not the outside was higher than the middle. Okay, and this is the case when we think that ice is still growing. And I'll say the vast majority of the polygon landscapes did not have low center polygons that we looked at. The vast majority of them, and this is one that we had here right here as well, were high center polygons. And this is a condition in which the ice is degrading. And I'll go through what's going on there real quickly. Okay, so high center polygon. Okay, so the center's higher than the areas right next to it. Okay, and in this situation, the wedges are right here. Okay, and this is degrading ice, so that means that ice is melting, that permafrost is melting, and why it's melting is because we have these little depressions next to it that are usually filled with snow during the winter. Okay, and I just talked about what happens when we have snow there. Well, that's going to prevent or inhibit the freezing. Okay, and then in the spring, that snow melts, and we'll get pools of water there that are going to make that melting of those ice wedges even faster. Okay, so those high center polygons were indications of degrading ice. Okay, both of those though, and this is an example of kind of something in between there. We didn't have a big extreme difference here, but I'll show you some big extreme differences later on. Both of those polygon features are set up from those ice wedges. Okay, John, you got anything to add to that? John joined us on the trip as well too, so I wanted to embarrass him for sure. All right, okay, so moving on. So this was another pit. Now we're a little bit further north. We're 67.2. So now we're above the Arctic Circle. The Arctic Circle's at 66. Okay, so we're pretty far north. Okay, where I think this one was right above the Brooks Range there, and an area that we definitely expected to see permafrost at 50 centimeters. Okay, permafrost was typically at 50 centimeters, but we dug down all the way to 200 and we didn't find it at all. And you can see this pool of water here. Okay, so this one is no longer a gelosol. This is a Humma-Gela aquept. Okay, so it's an inceptisol, and it's an inceptisol that's occurring in gelic soil temperature regime. So that just means that it's 0 degrees C throughout most of the year. Okay, all right. Right next to this one, so again 67.2, we're at the same spot, Coldfoot site. We were able to find some gelisols in this area, and the areas we found the gelisols were ones that we had that big organic hat on. So again, that's showing its effect in terms of protecting that permafrost. When we had that organic material protecting it, we still had those gelisols. I mean, yeah, still those gelisols, and the permafrost was still at about 50 where we expected it. Okay, and this was on the mound. All right. So this is probably my second favorite soil of the whole trip. This is a Terek Histo Turb L. Okay, and this is an example of a small-scale Pingo, and we called it a Pimple, okay, because it's small, and I'll talk about what's going on there. And one other distinct feature of this one, which we haven't seen so far, it's in that Turb L suborder. So Turb L means lots of mixing, okay? So trying to identify the horizons on this soil is absolutely terrible. And actually, so Chen Lu Ping is the guy that kind of put this tour together. It's been running for about 20 years. And when he describes gelisols, he doesn't do them like a traditional taxonomist would and describe horizons in sequence. He draws pictures, and he puts the OI material there, okay? And he does that because this is what some of these gelisols look like. Okay, they're all mixed up, and we got tons of slash horizons. So we already talked about the W horizon. What's the JJ? Cryoturbation. We got lots of mixing in this one. Okay, all right. So I'll show you some more pictures of this one. Okay, so there's a pimple. I'm trying to pop it. That's me with my knife. All right, there's the pimple on the landscape. And there's a bunch of them right here. Okay? So, has anyone heard of Pingos before? Okay? So, Pingos and Pimples, what they are, and I'm just going to describe the way that this one is forming. There's two mechanisms of formation, but I don't want to get too much in the other one. Okay? So, this one is a groundwater fed one. Okay? So, we have our landscape right here. And we have our permafrost here, so permafrost. And then we have our water table here. Okay? And what's happening here is that we essentially have a little bubble of water that's being pushed up from the water table via artesian pressure. Okay? And that water then is moving into the permafrost region. And then over time, it's freezing, okay, and expanding and growing upwards, okay? So these pingos, when they occur, they can be much bigger than this, but what defines them is we dig through them, we're going to find a big chunk of solid ice, okay? And this is one way that occurs, and this is the way that pingos occur in an open system with connection to the groundwater. Okay, so artesian pressure pushing that water up, and then that water gets frozen, and it creates these little bubbles. Okay, and I think on the next slide I have, oh, it's a couple more slides down the road. Yeah, this one. So this is looking off at one of these pingos off in the distance, and these can be like, 50, 100 meters high. So they can be quite big. Okay, the pimple, and that's why we call that a pimple, because it's just a little guy on the landscape. And why we know that was groundwater fed is that we had carbonates present in this profile, and the carbonates were accumulated on the bottom surfaces of the rocks, okay, telling us that the carbonates were coming from the groundwater and accumulating on the bottom surface. Okay, and that's what David's holding there, a rock with pedogenic carbonates on the bottom of it. Okay, some other features in this pimple, we had some really nice ice lenses, and then this is a mix-up an area showing that cryoturbation. So when I drew that up here, that ice wedge before, that's that cryoturbation mixing on the sides of that ice. Okay, and then there's this is one of those that we took a core out of the side of it, and you can see it was right through that ice lens. All right, and there's our Pingel. Okay, so now we're at Chandler Shelf. And we're at 68.4, so we're pretty far up there. And another one of these mixed up ones. Okay, we got a OI, BG, OI, etc. Okay, and permafrost at 70. And again, this is much, we expected this permafrost to be probably in this area 40 centimeters, maybe even 30 centimeters, much higher than it was. And the reason why we didn't see it as high as it should have been is likely that it had a small organic hat. Okay. We also saw some sorting on this site. So this is small scale ice wedge formation, and here the ice wedges on the edges were pushing up rocks, these sorted circles of rocks. So I thought that was kind of a cool little feature.
So that ice is expanding.
Whoop, excuse me. Yep. So is that ice expanding? There wasn't, that was all one elevation. So what was going on there is those ice wedges, at the edge of the ice wedge, we were just pushing up rocks. So it probably was expanding, but I couldn't tell you for sure. Okay. All right. So another soil that we saw in this area. So we're expecting jellicoes all throughout this area, but we went and visited a little floodplain near Galbraith Lake, and we actually saw a what? What's this soil? A mollisol. Okay, so this is a mollisol. So this is a soil that doesn't have as much organic matter, but it has a pretty good amount of organic matter, has a relatively high base saturation, and this was forming in colluvium and alluvium. So water-laid material and then material that washed down the slope and accumulated here. Okay, and we had a buildup of that organic material. And the reason why we didn't see a jellisol here is because we had active water moving through this landscape. Okay, so this was on a floodplain. And the point is that even though we're in this area, we're thinking jellicoes everywhere, there are pockets that we can find these other soils. Okay, so actually David Weindorf is doing a little project on these mollisols, which aren't even mapped up there, but might be pretty important. Okay, and this is the landscape, and you can see this is the colluvial material moving down here right next to the river. Okay, and in this soil we had pedogenic carbonates. So these are these little white spots all throughout here. And what's happening there is that CO2 being released by microorganisms is reacting with the calcium and producing calcium carbonate pedogenically. Okay, couple more. So this is at 68.5. Okay, the permafrost here was expected to be at about 40 centimeters or so, and here we're talking about double the depth. Okay, and in this case we actually had a pretty decent hat, although it wasn't as high as much as we expected it. So it did classify as a Turb L, not a Histel. And this is an area that was real sloppy, that we think that this was the area that was probably permafrost at one point, and now it's starting to melt it. Okay, this is again a floodplain site. Okay, here is where we started to see the permafrost, and you can see the ice lenses in here and the organic material mixed up in there. Oops. And that's a picture of that landscape. All right, Histic Aqua Turb L, so a mixed up one, very wet, permafrost at 70 on the polygon, but we didn't find permafrost in the depression. So what we did here is so this is a high center polygon right here. Can you see that? And here's the depression right here. Okay, so this is where the ice wedge was melting away. Okay, and we saw when we dug down right here, we saw no permafrost anywhere. But we went over here, we did find permafrost, but it was a lot deeper than what we expected it. So we found it at 70 centimeters down here. And why this is all wet now, or why we call it aqua Turb L, is because that permafrost has melted, and we're getting gray redox in here, standing water from all that ice that melted away. Okay, so big changes here we're seeing this, and that's what. Yes, Andre.
The further you go north, are you still staying around like 90% silt for most of your other horizons?
So we often had lurs as our terrestrial material if we didn't have organic. Sometimes we saw alluvial, but alluvial still had high silt content. And yeah, that gravel and stuff, that was pretty much exclusively near Galbraith Lake. Okay, and that was Yeah, some high water movement.
Still like 90%.
No, that stuff isn't. No, that stuff was like loamy sand stuff. Okay, and there's a picture of that high center polygon, and this really illustrates that low center, that ditch that's forming next to it in that degrading ice condition. Okay, and this is the last profile we did. This was right as we pulled into Prudhoe Bay. Okay, and this was on the side of a river, and the river was undercutting this one, and this was a histic aqua Turb L. So again, lots of mixing. You saw this one already. A wet one, permafrost at 60, and up here they typically were finding it at like 30 centimeters. Okay, so again, about twice the distance deeper down. And this one again was a high center polygon. Okay, there's a picture close-up of some of that mixing. And there's that ice wedge melt. There's the top of the ice wedge. Okay, you can see how big it is, and there's that ice wedge melting away, being undercut by the adjacent stream. And there's the polygon. So there's the high center, and there's the dip right there. Okay, and here's the really nicely expressed polygons that you'll see way up by Prudhoe Bay. Okay, these are all high center polygons and really, really cool looking. Okay. All right, so what did I learn? So I learned a lot about polygon formation. I think that was one of the takeaways for me in working with one of the Russian scientists who's at UAF. He taught me a lot about interpreting high center and low center polygons. And secondary, I learned a lot about the permafrost and its pretty extreme loss. Okay, that was quite alarming. And even the people that were leading the trip, who had just been there a year before and been there for like the last 10 years, I mean, they were seeing remarkable changes every year they went up there. So it's pretty alarming, I think. Okay, I will show this picture, this footage here of the polygons. So we had a student join us on the tour, Taylor Blackman, and he took drone footage at a lot of the sites we visited. And this is just one of the sites, and it's looking up, you know, it's a nice view of the polygons. There's us walking across, and I think this is one of them right off the Hall Road here. So it's pretty, I think. I don't know, I like it. It's cool. Yeah, there's the Hall Road right there. I think there's Taylor right there sitting there.
So that's just like a bunch of grass then, or?
No, these are us walking off to the site.
No, like the terrain.
What's that?
What are you guys walking on?
Oh, yeah, tundra.
Okay.
Yep. Tundra, and you can see these colored areas here. These are wet areas. Okay, so tundra, kind of boggy stuff, you know. It's pretty soupy. All right. Oh, what happened there?
Yeah, the ground was super spongy. It was like you're walking across mattresses, like constantly. And there wasn't like I don't know, it seemed like we were in a whole different planet because there wasn't really a lot of grasses up north. It was all moss with lichen growing over it. So it was like really thick. It looked super pretty and real soft, but when you went to touch it, it was actually like, you know, hard lichen that was growing on top. But yeah, when we would walk, it was real. It was difficult to walk a little bit at times, just because it was so spongy. You know.
It's fun to walk, not difficult. Yeah, it was fun, right? And then once you get above the Arctic Circle, you don't see trees anymore. That's pretty much where the trees stop. So one of the other reasons, one of the reasons I wanted to go on this trip was trying to understand these features because they're evident in the landscapes today. Okay, so this is a picture. This is a picture of Gary Schultz, who's one of the participants on the tour. This is his iPad snapshot of a farm near Purdue University. Okay, and as we were driving around, we were talking a lot, and and Gary was telling me, yeah, I see all these features back in Purdue, and you know, I think they're glacial features. So you can see that same polygon landscape, because you got to remember, this whole landscape was at one time frozen as well too. Okay, and you can still see that existing polygon when you look at some of these images, and you can see it shaded in the difference in moisture contents. And on this map here, on these areas here in the middle of the polygons, these would be classified as haplodelphs. And then the areas right here, these dark areas, those are wet. And Gary was telling me that those are typically classified as wet mollisols. And he was interested in, okay, why the heck do we have this extreme variation when I walk 5 feet on this landscape? And when you're walking on a landscape, you don't get to see a look at like this. Why are you seeing mollisol versus alpha sol? And the reason for it is because these are periglacial features. Okay, those are old wedges. And when we were soil judging last couple weeks ago in Prairie du Chien, we saw one of these, right? You guys remember this? So we saw one of these periglacial features. This right here, that's an old ice wedge. So this Prairie du Chien, you can see an old ice wedge where that ice had melted away and we dumped all that upper material down into that old ice wedge. Okay, so it's kind of cool that we can still see some of this stuff. And it, you know, I mean, having seen it in person really helped my understanding of what I'm looking at now. Okay, so I did warn you I had a whole bunch more slides, and I do have a bunch of other stuff. So I can go through that if you like, or if somebody wants, if you guys want to take off, you can take off too. I'll just keep talking until nobody else is here. How about that? Okay, so other stuff that we saw a lot of research. Okay, so this is some of the research that near Toolik Bay. There's Sasha, and in this particular site we were looking at permafrost, and we were looking at these little teardrop ponds that were forming on the site. So it was really cool to see some research going on here. This is one of the experiments by Ted Scher, one of those papers I put up at the beginning of the presentation. And this was a pretty cool site. And what they're doing here is they had a warming experiment going on here. And what they did is they put up a bunch of snow fences, and those snow fences allowed a bunch of snow to accumulate here. And that snow then created that reduction in the permafrost, and it was a little bit of a warming experiment that they did, a passive warming experiment that they created. And you can see this is right at the edge of the snow fence. This is all area in which the permafrost was being degraded because it was accumulating snow. And these little chambers, they were measuring microbial respiration to see how much carbon was being released. And this is one of the neon sites. So we have a neon site up in Tree Haven. So these are long-term ecological sites. It's part of that network. Okay, we got to visit the Toolik Bay Research Station, which is one of the places I've always wanted to go. So this is a research station up near, it's above the Arctic Circle, and they got all sorts of cool projects, and a whole bunch of scientists from all over the world will stay and live there and do all sorts of cool experiments. And a couple of us were doing some research on the way as we hit each site. This is Karen Vaughn and some of her students, and she was looking at microbial diversity in these different gellisols. We learned a little bit about agriculture, so I was kind of surprised that they have some agriculture, but this is mostly all south near Palmer, Anchorage area. Okay, so this is one of the fields that we visited, and you can see this light, fluffy silt stuff. Okay, you guys shouldn't leave. I got a good joke coming. You want to hear a joke? Okay, so all right, I'll tell you tomorrow. Okay, so and the crops that they were growing, so they were growing peanuts, and they were growing wheat. Why were they growing peanuts and wheat? Because they were going to grow, they're harvesting peanut butter and jelly salt sandwiches. No, it's not. It's not what they were growing. No, now you can leave. That was really bad, I know. Okay, so, but there's some agriculture going on. Obviously, they have lots of challenges in terms of the growing season there. Okay. We went to a muskox farm. We got to see them. They're pretty cool looking. Yeah. Got to visit a glacier, so we saw one of the biggest glaciers in actively growing glaciers in the not actively growing one of the most easy accessible glaciers in the world. One of the biggest easy accessible glaciers in the world. This is a Matanuska Glacier near Palmer, and this is the edge of it. There's the front edge of it a little bit closer. Oops. There's myself and John climbing on it. And there's some of the material moving off the top of the glacier. Okay, and seeing this glacier really helped me envision some of the stuff that we currently see in our landscape. Okay, because I mean we're looking at our landscapes here in Wisconsin 10,000 years after glaciers receded, and being at a glacier front and being able to see some of these features really helped me. So what am I standing next to over here? What's this thing called? Does anyone know? What's that? Came, yeah. So it's conical shaped hill, okay? And there was the glacier, so this is an area where the glacier, there's us walking back here, the glacier's over here, so at one point it was over here, and we had a little hole in that material all piled in on that hole, okay? And then there's me right next to it. So it was really neat to see all that stuff and kind of envision that. That helped me. That's the floodplain where the glaciers have receded, and that's the source of the silt that's blowing all over the landscape. We also got to go into a permafrost tunnel. So this is the Fox Permafrost Tunnel. Okay, so this was, it's currently run by the Army Corps of Engineers, and what they were telling us that, so they dug into the permafrost, so this is the tunnel, and some of the reasons they dug into the permafrost were they were looking for places to hide weapons, okay, and also they were doing some mining activities as well. But this is a research, now it's open to researchers to go study the permafrost, and we were able, and it's not open to everybody, so the public can't get in there, so we got special permission to go in there and tour it, which was pretty awesome. And this is a picture of it. Some of the features we saw in there, so we saw some really cool ice wedges. This is one of my favorite ice wedge. It looks like a little bird. Saw nice ice lenses in there. Saw, this is a woolly mammoth bone that they estimated 14,000 years. And got to take a chunk of ice. John even ate some of the ice, right, John? Yeah. and we got, I took some wood out of there too. I brought some wood. I shouldn't have done that. It's about 10,000 years old. Just couldn't resist. So it was really fun to go in the permafrost tunnel. All right, we went to Denali. So there's Denali, and we were one of the 10% that actually saw it. Then we did a bunch of hiking on the trip. So this is one of our hikes up Denali. This is the Savage Creek Trail. We didn't see any bear, right? I don't think we saw any bear. There was people that said they saw polar bears at our camp in Dead Horse the last night, and they said they were at the airport as well. But we didn't get to see, I didn't personally see any of them. Saw lots of this animal creating this. What's this poop? This is moose poop. So we saw a bunch of moose. There's one up front, up close. We saw lots of these mosquitoes. They weren't as bad as I thought they'd be. So the only place they were really bad was at Galbraith Lake, but they were bad at Galbraith Lake. So I did a bunch of hiking. This is hiking up to a waterfall. Went swimming in that one. Spent a lot of time on Dalton Highway. It's a pretty gnarly road. If you get a chance, I'd highly suggest driving it. And you can see this Dalton Highway starts at Fairbanks, goes all the way out to Prudhoe Bay. It's a gravel road. John got to drive it twice, right? We got to drive it up and back. Yep. Those are trucks afterwards, so they take a beating. There's the front of our dashboard covered in mosquitoes. Saw a pipeline. So the pipeline follows the whole Dalton Highway up there. That pipeline looks like this. So it's pretty. I was pretty impressed that they could build this thing that whole extent. Okay, and that was. Olive, you have a question? Shh. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. No, I'm sorry. So there's the pipeline. Oh yeah, I'm trying to. There's the source. So those are the oil rigs where they're getting the oil and pumping it down. So they used to have to truck all that. Now they pump it, and it's not very efficient in terms of the amount they're pumping. It doesn't really. It's almost like a net loss. They were saying so. Why are the houses up on stilts up in Prudhoe Bay? So this is way. What's that?
So they don't melt the permafrost.
Yeah, so they don't melt the permafrost. So everything's up on stilts there because they don't want the heat going from the buildings into the permafrost, because that would cause accelerated melting and they would have all sorts of problems with their foundations. Went to the Arctic Circle and made it all the way up to the Arctic Ocean, and we jumped in, went swimming too. So that's the crew that we went on, and a couple people. So this is David right here. He's one of the organizers. This is Karen Vaughn, and where's Sasha? Sasha's right here. That's the other organizer. Okay, there's David and Karen. So special thanks to them for putting together this tour. And I was actually lucky enough so now I'm going to be one of the co-instructors for this tour going forward. And this is an annual tour, so if any of you are interested in going on it, you can come talk to me. And I'd highly suggest it. It'll transfer credits. You can get credits for taking that course through UAF, and it will transfer for one of our courses here. Okay, it was a lot of fun, great learning experience. Sasha taught me a lot about polygons, but he also taught me what to do in case you don't have a shot glass. So he taught us a little trick: cut a banana, you can fill it with whiskey, it works just fine. And there's Chen Lu. So the whole trip, and this is the idea of Chandler, and this guy, he's retired now, but he's run this tour for 20 plus years, and he's, he is our expert on permafrost soils. And right now, that position at UAF is not occupied by a pedologist at all. So hopefully they will fill that position, because this is a critical area of research, I think, for our globe. And there's a nice little video on the whole Alaska soil experience called Between Earth and Sky. I do have a copy of this, and I could arrange for possibly another showing. But this was produced by David and some other folks, and it's pretty neat. You can YouTube it if you like it. And thanks to Stevens Point for help sponsor my trip up there. So I went pretty long, but I had a lot of pictures, and I didn't get them all in there. So if you have questions, we can talk about stuff. So thanks for your time.